Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's keynote talk by Zhamak Dehghani. I think it's going to be a highlight of Data Week that we have Zhamak here with us today. She is the Director of Emerging Technologies at ThoughtWorks, and she'll be talking with us today about an important emerging technology called data mesh. If on the outside chance you haven't heard of data mesh, it's really a concept that's been taking the world by storm. For the last couple of years. Many companies, including LinkedIn, are busily working to implement data mesh. And Zhamak was kind enough to talk with our data management team about the data mesh initiative here at LinkedIn. And on top of that, she's going to be giving us this intro to data mesh, which I'm very excited about. So with that, welcome, Zhamak.
Thank you, Joshua. Thank you for the introduction. Good morning, everyone. I'm excited to be here, and I have an action-packed talk for you. So let me just share my screen and get right into it. Can you see my screen okay? And I hope that you don't see any of the Zoom control panels on top of the screen. I have the chat open, and I will keep an eye on it during the talk. So if you want to engage with me or have a little banter among yourself, I'm happy to keep an eye on that. And if you have any questions, I try to address it in time, but we will leave some time at the end for Q&A. All right. Perfect. Let's get started. So thank you, Joshua, for the introduction. A lot of the content you see here is drawn from my latest book on the topic, Data Mesh Delivering Data-Driven Value at Scale. So if you think the pace of the talk might be a little bit fast, or I might brush over some of the more, detailed conversations, you can always refer back to the book, and you should find everything we talk about today there. All right, so why data mesh and why now? Why we should care about yet another approach to kind of big data analytical data management. Data mesh really came as a question at the beginning, around 2018, and an observation of this inflection point. I worked with a lot of clients, companies like yourself, big, hairy, complex, digital organizations in the West Coast of US that were having big data initiatives, and they were investing in data platforms. What they were seeing was a plateau of return. As organizations becoming more complex with more digital touch points, creating more data, sources of data, diversity of sources of data within the organization and externally to the organizations. And that's, I guess, next to a very ambitious use cases and initiatives using the data beyond just having dashboards to show various trends. And really applying data in analytics and ML embedded into every aspect of the application. What we saw was that they becoming over time slower to respond to change as access continues to grow, the scale continues to grow, the solutions become slower to respond to change and ultimately getting value from data. So it really came as, is there an alternative to what we've done over the last few decades to really get to new heights? And the common problems, that we were seeing facing that plateau of return were unanimous. And I think you have probably seen and experienced this in your previous jobs or in your experience as well, that data users, the analysts, the scientists, kind of complaining that they don't have access to the data in a timely fashion to really validate some of the hypotheses that they might have. On the other hand, the data providers and data engineers, they're kind of, scratching their head and they're under a lot of pressure to get data and present it and cleanse it and model it and present it in a way that data scientists can use. Stuck in the middle of real providers, applications, and the data users and the data, leaders were acknowledging the problems of investing a lot of money into yet another data platform initiative and not getting the value. So when you look at the industry and where the money is being invested at a kind of the macro level, the story kind of repeated itself that, what I'm putting on the screen here is from the Vantage Partners. They're a consultancy company. They survey top 500 Fortune 500 companies and survey their executives. And what this diagram is showing is there's a large amount of money is being invested into big data, AI, ML, but on the other hand, the measures that show cultural and transformational change in getting value from data, ultimately competing using data, those measures are fairly disappointing in my mind. So we haven't stopped working at this problem, right? If you look at Matt Turk's from Firstmark landscape, the data, he called it MAD, data landscape. We've been very busy innovating, and I think your company has contributed to many of these technological innovations. So what hasn't changed? We have been evolving, the technology. And what data mesh challenged was this basic assumption that organizationally and architecturally, for us to get value from data, we've got to collect, cleanse, transform data in this monolithic approach by the data organization with big data platforms, and get data from all of these operational systems, put them in one place, and one place, I don't mean physically in one place, but under the control of big, one group of people, and then so that we can feed our innovation agenda, right? So that we can use that data in many other scenarios. So data mesh at its heart challenges this assumption. And once you challenge this assumption, then the world might look a little bit different. But if you look at the existing kind of data architecture based on this assumption, and of course this is comically simplified, but more or less organizations look like this. On one hand, you have your business domains, right? You've got your, sorry, let me bring my watch so I can watch the time. You've got what your business is doing at LinkedIn, or here I have the example of a retailer, right? So in a retailer world, you've got your order management, you've got e-commerce, you've got payments. These are business functions that have a very specific business outcome and a set of applications that are driving to support that business outcome. You have your e-commerce application, you have your shopping cart microservice, whatever your architecture is, whether it's a service-oriented or microservice-oriented architecture or using SaaS products, you often align yourself with a particular business outcome, and you've got technology domains that support that. And those applications, right, your shopping cart microservice or your payment services, they often have their own transactional databases to keep the state of that system, and they're designed fundamentally to optimize the performance of that particular application. But to draw, so we've kind of on the left-hand side in the operational data domain, we've got a very domain-oriented alignment of technology and business and operational data. But on the other right-hand side, to achieve, having this purview of data, purview of data across the organization and be able to correlate information across all of these services, so that we can either generate reports or train machine learning models. What we do is we get a bunch of ETL pipelines, we engineer them so that we can extract data from these various sources and then model them maybe a lot more in a database or a lot less into a lake. And then downstream from that, either we create more data marts or model data, or directly use the data warehouse to achieve the analytical use cases and feed data to analytical use cases. And on the top, kind of always late in my mind in the game, the governance come to picture to say, okay, how do I make sure that this data is actually secure and complies with the legal and various compliance that we might have. And the challenge with this model, apart from being centralized and the centralization becoming a bottleneck, is that a lot of the complexity lies within that middle part of the data pipelining and data engineering, trying to get in meaning a little bit too late from the applications by the people who are not really familiar with what's going on into those applications, right? And it creates an accidental complexity that we then try to layer with more and more technology to manage, right? Access to the data is, and modeling of the data or changes to the transformation of the data happens way too late and too far from the actual domains where action happens, where they're using the data or generating the data. So what is, sorry, let me just, Google is being a little bit unkind to me. So if we were going to, I have a bit of a lag, sorry, and for some reason, oh, it jumps over my slide. So let's see what happens now. All right, this is what I wanted to show you. Okay, so what is data mesh? And I can go on and give you the theory behind it, but the thoughts maybe I listen to Carl Sagan and give you an example of that. So if we imagined that data mesh was implemented and we had a data sharing model based on this approach for analytical use cases, what would it look like? And here I will give you example of another domain. Let's say we are a Spotify or I don't know, Apple Music, and we're in a digital streaming world. If data mesh was in place, the teams, the cross-functional teams that are aligning themselves to a particular business domain and business objective would work together to not only support the business with the technology, but they also work together to generate and use data for analytical purposes. So you have this kind of embedded partnership with AI and data. The example I put here is that, you know, if I have a business that is trying to provide the best experience, musical experience to my listeners, well, for me to be able to scale, I probably have various teams working on various aspects of that business, right? I've got let's say I've got a team that's working on this business objective of creating context-aware and immersive musical experiences. And these guys are working hard, or girls, working hard to create playlists, right? Curated, automatically created playlists for the users. So in that case, to generate those playlists, the data needs to come from many training machine learning models. For those data come from multiple business units or multiple cross-functional teams. The data will come from player team, whose objective is actually creating a sticky and delightful digital experience using the players, but at the same time, they're generating and sharing the player events and player sessions, not necessarily always events, but sometimes, you know, in the form of, okay, how the users are actually, listeners are interacting, and what does that engagement session for a user looks like. Let's say playlist team wants to extend those playlists to the sporting activities. So they're actually curious to get data from the partnership domain. In this case, partnership is the team that's providing an integrated musical experience with the Peloton or other, running or cycling platforms. And in this case, they can directly go to people and find the data that they are generating around the partnership. So partnership team has an objective to provide that integrated experience. They are working with the likes of the Peloton and see which of their members are on their platform and which songs they're liking as they're cycling on their platform. So they have the integrated APIs into those external platforms, and they are best placed to provide the data about the members' likes on the Peloton platform, let's say. And so this idea of using and sharing data is really embedded in every business team. You can then leads to kind of a bit data curious culture, because anytime you have a hypothesis, like this playlist team has a hypothesis, can I enhance the playlist with the additional data that I'm getting from partner platforms? That doesn't lead to a multi-weeks or month initiative of a data team try to kind of talk to maybe a partner team, and they talk to someone else and really have this high friction experience. There is, of course, for this to even be possible, there is an invisible platform and set of computational policies that I haven't even put here that we can talk about that. But the whole purpose of this to really achieve some sort of a limitless scale, that if tomorrow you have a new function, if your company is scaling and now is in the business of, I don't know, providing videos or providing other types of media, you're setting up a new cross-functional team, and you keep giving them the responsibility around data analytics as well. And the value that is generated from the data is really defined by this positive network effect of, kind of an N square of all of these relationships, the data sharing links between the data products that these domains generate. So hopefully this gives you a taste of if data mesh happens, what would it look like? And if if it sounds good to you, maybe you want to hang around for the rest of this talk. But if if it's a future that you don't want to be part of, you can go out and get a coffee for yourself and come back for the next talk. But hopefully I convinced you that there is something here. Let's go deeper. So fundamentally, the story that I shared has 4 principles underpinning it, and I'll just give you a little brief taste of what each of these principles mean. So the very first principle is about domain ownership. So domain ownership in data mesh means architecturally and organizationally, we're bringing the responsibilities around data sharing and also applying data in analytics or AI within the cross-functional teams that align themselves with a particular domain of the business, right? The domain of the business are the examples I give, like the listener's domain or player's domain. These are how the business itself break itself apart. So the as a retail example, sorry, I'm going to jump between the retail and digital music streaming. But in a retail example, for example, if you're, I don't know, if you're a Gap or Banana Republic or any of those brands, you have a domain of your business that is responsible for producing and designing, the outfits and clothes. And there is a group of people responsible for selling and getting that to the market, and a group of people responsible for distribution and logistics. And within those teams, that is biz dev data ops teams, they are also responsible for sharing data that is most aligned with those domains. And I understand that there are some data products that align themselves really well. Like, for example, when you're in the production domain, your designs and sourcing and where does the material come from, how you source those very much align to that business domain. And in some cases, you may decide to create a completely new domain just for the sake of maybe having some form of aggregate data, but more or less they align themselves with the business. And then one other topic here is that we are not only talking about applications and digital solutions we're building, but also the data itself as a product. So one of the challenges that may arise by this division of responsibility around data is that, well, how is this going to be any better than what we have today? We have silos of applications databases that don't talk to each other. The data is kind of dark. Nobody can get to it or make meaning of it. Aren't we end up with another siloing? And that's why the second principle exists, to change our relationship or invert our relationship with data, to say data is not just an asset that we're going to hold to ourselves and not share with anybody, but it's actually a product. And as a domain, we have an accountability to share that data as a product to the data consumers, which are data analysts, the data scientists within the domain and externally to the domain. So the concept of the data as a product, let me see, really requires to rethink and really reimagine what we mean by data. To be honest, I can't imagine how I feel, how sad I feel when I see a lot of demos or different applications and I say, oh yeah, I am actually, this is my data product, this is my data. So I'm getting a link to a connection to this table in this database, and that is my data product, or that is my data. To me, that's the source of a lot of accidental complexities that we have, that we've forgotten to abstract what that underlying data really should be with, and augment it with a lot of other information and capabilities to make it be usable, right? So if you think about the basic usability characteristics of any product that you have, there is a set of usability characteristics that applies here to the data products that I put on the left-hand side. So every single data product should be discoverable, right? The first step of a user of a data product is, I have a hypothesis about my playlist optimization around the sporting activities. What is out there for me to discover? Is there something about the, sporting activities of the listeners that I can find? So every single data product must be discoverable. When I discover it as a data user, can I understand it? How do I understand it? Is it good enough for me to just look at the schema? Is that enough on this, satisfying my understanding? Probably not. So in addition to schema, you probably want some, computational documentations that show the behavior of the data, or have a set of tests with great expectation to show the shape of your data, right? To help with the understanding of the data. Of course, it has to be addressable, so I can actually get access to it securely with proper policies put in place. And then I need to, as a user, be able to trust it. So what does trusting data mean? How can a data product bridge the gap between what I know and what I don't know about the data so that I can trust it? And the things that I don't know about the data probably are around, okay, you know, kind of metadata around it. What is the timeliness? How often this data gets updated? Does this satisfy my requirements in terms of timeliness requirements? What's the level of its completeness? Is this data very timely, but is actually missing some, you know, key information? Level of integrity, has it been consolidated to, you know, to show the high integrity? So those are the additional information that we need to kind of real time almost provide, because this data is not static, through APIs around that data product, so that we can bridge that gap between known and unknown for a data user to trust your data. And ultimately, as a data user, I want to use it in a way that is native to me. And right now, where we are standing in terms of native access to the data, we have a very diverse set of data users. You have data-intensive applications, developers that want data probably in a streaming format, your analysts in the SQL format, and your data scientists in a columnar format. And unfortunately, I think this is just an indication of lack of maturity of where we are in the curve of evolution of our technology, is that each of those access models or each of those storage models provide a very different interface. So as a data user, for some reason today, I'm getting exposed to whether my data is stored columnar or in a tabular format. And that's unfortunate, but that's where we are in the curve of evolution. So that's why in this picture, I put kind of a multimodal access for this same data product. And hopefully these data products are valuable, right? They're delivering some value. They're not just a set of codes that then you have to go to some other data product to get meaning out of it. All right, so let's go to the next one. So you might, this is the point of conversation that people who spend the money on infrastructure or technology will kind of start scratching their head that how is this even possible? Like either how would I make it feasible for each of these cross-functional teams to own and share data? Is this cost effective? Because one of the advantages of centralizing solutions is that those you can cost effectively manage the data at a different cost, right? At the opportunity cost of getting to that data a bit later, and have a bit of a kind of friction in getting access to the data. So Selfserve infrastructure as a platform is another component that tries to address the cost of ownership and the feasibility. And you might say that we have a lot of data. Oops, sorry, I don't know what's going on. My let's see if my display refreshes itself. Okay. The Selfserve data platform in the data mesh world, and I know this is a busy diagram, so there's a couple of chapters in the book about it. It's really about raising the level of abstraction for data management APIs, with data management APIs that lend themselves to this data product oriented thinking, so that as today you probably have, you have data hubs and Kafka. These are the things you have invented, which I applaud you for, but you probably have a lot of technologies that manage the storage or identification or workflow data processing pipelines and so on. And that's really, in a data mesh language, that's kind of the bottom line utilities that you have. What you want to get to is that I, as a data provider or consumer, I want to think in a higher level of abstraction. I want to think about these domain-oriented data products, which give me all of those affordances that I mentioned in the previous slide in terms of understandability and native access. And I'm exposed a set of platform APIs, and APIs, of course, can be accessed through maybe UI or command line or any other kind of mode of access. But the point is that these APIs are really oriented around the data product, managing the lifecycle of a data product, or accessing to a data product, or understanding the documentation around the data product. And I think that requires a kind of a new level of, I suppose, set of collaborating tools to give you that. And of course, we just don't want to work on one or two data products. We want to also understand the whole connected kind of graph of data products as a mesh, where we can search for data products, or we can monitor them, or we can browse the lineage of them. And those are your mesh experience plane kind of capabilities that we need to implement. So I think we've got the utilities covered today really well, but the cost of integration of those utilities to act as a mesh experience plane or data product experience plane is still quite high, and it requires a fair bit of custom development. All right, so We've got the infrastructure covered. This is the point of this point of conversation. People who traditionally be responsible for governance of the data, kind of having a bit of a panic attack. That how am I gonna certify trustworthy data? How do I make sure PII and all of those other kind of policies are enforced if I'm not in the loop as a point of control? If there is no central point of control in this model is a distributed model or decentralized model, and that's where federated kind of computational governance comes to play. And really, the two pieces to this. One, the first piece is that because we were kind of federating the responsibility of the data ownership to business teams, we also, they may have just hyper optimize their behavior on local incentives of their domains, which is around how well my data product is selling, right? What is the net promoter score of my data product, like typical product ownership like behavior, right? But what they're not doing, what we may not be doing, is that how compliant my data product is with a set of global standards that make my data product a good citizen of this mesh, make my data product interoperable with the rest of the data products. So to address this concern, to address this, establishing an equilibrium between this decentralization and local optimization of people's behavior and a global, perhaps, optimization around interoperability and standards that need to be cross-functional, we think about creating a governance model that is based on federation, as in the people that are in the domains have a responsibility as part of the global governance, and they have an accountability and a set of KPIs associated with that. And this global governance is not trying to enforce all kinds of standardization. It's not trying to, let's say, model all of the data centrally, but what they're trying to do is create a minimum set of standardization that is required for this mesh to operate as a whole system, right? So if I look at a customer, if I find customer information in, let's say, listener information in my playlist domain, I can actually correlate that information to my player domain, right? That it's the same listener. So around your schema around identification and standardized identification is one, and many other standardizations around security, around access control, and so on. And the second part of this, the computational part of it, is that how could this be feasible? How could, in this individually developed data product with individual life cycle under the control of different teams, adopt this kind of globalize the standards? And that's where policies as code come to a picture. That's, every blueprint or scaffolding of every data product could include the set of policies as code implemented by the platform and embedded into every data product. As an example of that might be, we want to expose a set of metrics out of every single data product that articulates the qualities and also guarantees of the data quality that data product provides against those metrics. So then you might say, well, we may want to, I don't know, standardize on data W3C quality metrics and language. And okay, if you do that, let's build a little agent or library, however your architecture is designed, for data products to be able to expose and emit those metrics and have the observability to be able to show those metrics at the mesh level. So platform has a big part in embedding that. All right, so these are the 4 principles of the data mesh. And if I just give you one other, I guess, architecture diagram, this is what it would look like, right? You've got your domain-oriented data teams that are now augmented with kind of maybe a smaller team within those domains that are responsible for data products. So you've got your app developers, you've got your now data product developers, data product owners that are sharing and using these data products. The data products are designed as an architectural quantum, which means that it's an independent unit of your architecture that can evolve and maintain its functionality as one unit. So you don't have, pipeline somewhere else and then storage taken care of by someone else, API taken care of by someone else. It's actually all of that, the pipeline, the storage, the API access, all that contained within this architecture quantum. You've got your kind of different planes or APIs of your data platform to provide really a native, mesh native experience. And ultimately, you've got a set of global policies that are being embedded computationally in and every data products. And of course, observed and monitored by your mesh experience plane. All right, so a lot of the questions that I get asked are around how do we get started and how do we get there? And a journey of 1,000 miles, it begins with the first step. So and I know you're somewhere on the journey. So I know that for many of you, this is not a single step that you're taking. But often when I talk to folks, I would say the very first step is to ask yourself, is data mesh for me? And is data mesh for me now? And to answer this question, I developed this kind of spider graph with a set of axes that I think organizations can, or its characteristics that organizations can evaluate and see if this is the right thing for them now. And if I zoom out and I would, try to be also very critical, I would say you probably want to score somewhere on that pink area in this spider graph to be in the right place in terms of risk. And if you're not, if you evaluate yourself and you would say, look, yeah, I'm scoring pretty well in terms of all of these axes. On one of these axes, I'm not scoring that well. It's not that you have to, arms in the air and I'm going to stop and not do data mesh, but it's about what risk am I being exposed to that I need to mitigate. So let's go through some of this. And I think LinkedIn probably from of course, I only know you as a user. I haven't been part of your organization, but I assume from what I'm understanding, you probably have the organizational complexity and the services and the touch points. You probably work with partners. You have various services that you're providing to the enterprises, to the end users. So you probably have the complexity of the business domains. You're not a simple business anymore that can work with monolithic. If you are, perhaps, and you don't have this kind of domain-oriented, rich domain, I suppose, business, this may not be the right time. Okay, so data-oriented strategy. At the top, I think that the strategy of your organization should have a big element around application of data. If it doesn't, and if it's only maybe some mission statement somewhere, perhaps it's going to be difficult to drive execution of data mesh, because you really need those strategic initiatives to piggyback data mesh implementation on top and also show value using those. Executive support is another one. If this is a grassroots movement by your engineers, that's all good, but I think it's going to run into really headwinds if you don't have that top-down organizational support. Some of the most successful data mesh implementation that has taken, the 2 or 3 years have had CEO down, kind of embracing the transformation toward this very data-oriented organizational model. And then that trickles down into many of the hard decisions that the executives or leaders in your organization need to take to justify investing in the platform versus perhaps building a point solution. And that's just constantly a challenge, right? As we invest and get value. I think technology at core, definitely, I think LinkedIn, based on my observation, hits this one, no problem, as in ability and desire to use or, to kind of value technology as a big part of it. Many other organizations, they just want to buy technology and get a bunch of consultants and integrate it. I don't think you guys fall into that. So this is great. Early adopters, appetite for risk, because we're still in the early days of data mesh. We don't have 20 different case studies that have been all successfully implemented. Data mesh is only a few years old, so there will be some unknowns along the way that imposes some risk that we have to navigate. Modern engineering practices, data mesh is at its core is bringing some of the software engineering practices around continuous delivery, around automation into the world of data, and embeds that at every level. So I am imagining LinkedIn is scoring pretty well here as well. Domain-oriented organizations. So some of the big tech firms, in fact, in Silicon Valley, building really interesting kind of hardware and software that I've talked to, despite being, modern engineering, having modern engineering, technology at core, data-driven, all of that, they're just by design, they're very functionally divided. As in, you have a team that works with hardware, you have a team that works with software, and then you have a team works with data, and that's functionally divided, as in technically divided, not domain-oriented division, really imposes challenges to this model of data sharing around domains, because it's really pushing responsibility in a domain-oriented design and tech business alignment. And if you are functionally divided, you may want to rethink this, because you may be able to do data mesh, but you would do data mesh within your data organization. So you may not still remove those kind of monolithic bottlenecks that we discussed earlier. And the other thing is the time, in terms of timing. This is a long-term commitment. This is not, in a few months we're going to do data mesh and that's it. It's really a transformation, organizational transformation that we've got to go through. So if you think that you scored somewhere in this high or medium here, and if not, just think about the challenges. Like, for example, if you don't have that long-term transformational, and you're maybe during some exploration or POCs in some corners, you may want to bring people on board that have done these sort of transformations in the past and get their help. All right, so in terms of execution, I really see data mesh as a component of your data strategy. So let's go back to that digital music example, right? So if their strategy is to use data to, partner every experience with data and ML, usually that strategy drives a bunch of initiatives, right? And in each of its initiatives might be many different projects, but these are the big ticket items in terms of like the change that they want to create. So one of those, for example, might be, okay, we want to intelligently curate and present context-aware, personalized, playlist and content. And that initiative in itself might turn into a bunch of intelligent applications. So it could be the personalized playlist and the playlist browser. It could be explore around, what similar music I like, and let me explore that, or tell me about my preferences so I know more about myself. So these are all like possible digital experiences that are enhanced with data and AI. And then if you pick one of those, let's pick the playlist browsers, that lead itself to a set of data products. If you work backwards, so we're working backward from a strategy to applications to the data products, then we say, okay, we need a bunch of different playlists, we need the music profiling, we need the profiling of the users, there's a bunch of data products that we need to create. And along the way, of course, we've got to create the platform that allows these autonomous data products to be maintained and supported. So really the strategy around the execution of the data mesh also goes through this evolutionary, business-driven, end-to-end and iterative, right? So we go this thin slice, and let's pick one business initiative. Let's see what applications that need data. Let's work backward to create the data. Let's work backward to kind of build the supporting and enhance the supporting platform. And along the way, let's think about the organizational change that needs to happen during these thin slices around the structure of the organization, around the process, culture, and maturity. So let's look at some of these. I know this business-driven iterative into the evolutionary sounds like a really big word. So what does it look like? I want to just give you a few. So business-driven, I think we looked at it, right? Pick the initiatives and kind of drive the data product generation. And that's kind of inverse to some of the approaches that I've seen, which is, oh, let's get all of the modeling of our, let's say, I don't know, the domain events done upfront, data product done, and then we get all of these domains to generate the data product. And then, I'm sure we will get some value out of it. And either approach has some pros and cons. If you become very business driven and value driven, as in I'm going to, I have a business use case, and then I'm going to drive creation of the data products and sharing of those. What might happen, of course, is that you lean toward point solutioning, and you have to work to the timeline of those, kind of business initiatives. And you might, incur some technical debt around your platform. So you've got to manage that. If you are very focused on the production and mass production, you may do a lot of investment upfront on the data that is not going to get much value, and you will get questioned along the way on the value of the work that you're doing. So we've got to kind of balance these two. But I wanted to leave you with a couple of tools or ways of thinking about this multi-year journey, right? If it's a if there's a lot of pieces to this, it's a piece of data product, it's a piece to governance, this piece to domain ownership and organizational structure. But if you simply look at it from this, kind of Roger Everett's model of diffusion of innovation in any society or organization, you will see this curve of adoption. You hope to see this curve of adoption, right? And if you tailor your activities decisions around which phase of this evolution you're in, you end up with a model that it kind of says, okay, if you're still early in the journey, you are really targeting your solutions, your data products, your domains, your platforms to your innovator and early adopter part of your organization, which are exploring and bootstrapping really best practices and sensible defaults on how to do things so that you can get ready for that expand and scale, right? So that you can now scale that model of working and your platform to the larger audience with the early majority and late adopters, right? The big part of your organization. And then you get to exploitation phase that you are now optimizing for stability and resilience and perhaps optimizing for laggards. And if you just if you take this approach, then you can overlay this on each of those pillars, and then you can kind of I guess, design your activities and projects and decisions based on those. So I'll just put an example here. If you think about the domain ownership, right? Domain ownership is about, okay, domains are responsible for the data and the sharing of the data, and of course, platform empowers that. If you're in the exploration phase, we really don't want to start with a lot of domains. We want to start with a small number of domains, and we want to start perhaps with the domains that are most suitable for adopting this, as in they're already using a modern data stack. They perhaps have actually data requirements internally, so they have internal initiatives around using the data for the empowerment of their own applications or business function. So they're both the providers and consumers, and they seem to be a great candidate to get started. When you're in expand phase, again, you target a different set of domains and so on and so on. And you can kind of apply this in the book. I overlaid each of these phases on top of the 4 pillars to show how we can make different decisions, as in when we are in Explorer Bootstrap, what do we do with that platform? What we do about the governance? And these are just examples. So you can kind of take this model and apply it to how you design your, I guess, macro roadmap of your journey, right? If this is a multi-year journey. So, but how about on a day-to-day basis, right? So this kind of the S-curve of adoption of data mesh can give you some kind of high-level roadmap of activities that you want to do, but at a micro level, every iteration, every sprint, how do we know that the solution that we build is actually the right solution? And how do we guide this evolutionary approach? And I'm using kind of the generative algorithms kind of idea of the fitness functions here, which have been applied in many different fields like evolutionary architecture. I'm just applying it to data mesh organization now. The idea of a fitness function is basically a function, objective function, that indicates how well a solution that you have built is fitting the target outcome that solution needs to provide. So let's put that in a context. In the example of, let's say, domain ownership, the outcome we want to achieve is the scale out data sharing. So it's actually generating value in step with the organizational growth. So as my organization is growing, or as the parts of organization that are generating and sharing data is growing, I'm not slowing down in getting value from that data. Okay, so if we agree that's the outcome, what are the measurable objectives that we can create? And these are not 1 or 2, these are a set of complementary objectives that helps us to create a balance, right? Not just hyperindex on one and not the other. And these are some examples here. So for example, well, we want to see the increased number of domains that are providing data. Okay, that's great. But let's make sure that's in sync with the increased number of domains that are actually consuming that analytical data and getting value from it. We want to see an increased peer-to-peer data sharing, or we want to see data that is aligned with the objective of the business, and so on. And from that, you can create these actual functions, and you can encode them into your dashboards, into your planning, and monitor them over time to see, okay, is the rate of new domains going up or going down? Is the rate of new data consumers plateaued or not? So you expect to see that S-curve, right, for the result of these functions. So you can build these functions into your dashboards, into your project management activities to really see if you're aligned with the objective. All right, let's talk about organization and culture. Very quickly, in the book, I use this framework, Galbraith's STAR model, to just say what are the aspects of organization that we need to think about, not so much that exactly how these aspects should be modeled based on the model. And there are really a few aspects that I think really encompasses all of the organizational design decisions that we have to make. Strategy, we talked about. Structure is about decision-making and structure, and structure of your teams. The processes, process of governance, the value stream of data, lifecycle management of data, all of these different processes. The rewards and incentives. How do we actually incentivize the domain teams to care about data? Because today they often don't, right? They often care about their application and end user experience, but they don't care so much about the internal data users. And how do we upskill people? How do we upskill the generalist, technologies that we have to become data product users or developers? A lot of it is engineering practices. So how do we upskill those folks? And culture, most importantly, is the set of those microcognitive values that each of us have in our minds, or embrace them in our life, that really impact what we value, which ultimately impacts the behavior and how we make decisions. And I put here a set of cultural values that are aligned with data mesh, and you can create your own, or you can get inspired by these, but really it's shifting what we value from I've got more data to I've got data that is really delighting the experience of my data users, right? I've got data that is making an impact and making a change. I'm creating a peer-to-peer collaboration of data sharing between different parts of my organization. So I highly encourage, if you are on that journey, think about your data culture and data values and draft those, and and live by them. In terms of team structure, I'm a big fan of team topologies. It's a fantastic work by Matthew and Manuel, that it really is a super simple way of thinking about team structure. They define a few different team models and a few different interaction models between the team. And if you think about the team topologies for data mesh, and this is again super simplistic, each of these boxes can be expanded to multiple teams. This is not a single team, this is like really a team of teams for each of these boxes. But in the most simplest way, you've got your kind of platform teams that thinking about those cross-functional capabilities to give autonomy and empower those domain teams that are responsible for end-to-end life cycle of data as a product. So those are, in the team topologies language, the green and red and yellow are your domain teams. This is your playlist team or application, player team, and so on. And they're providing data really as a service to the rest of the organization in a self-serve manner. Data that is discoverable, understandable, easily usable. And the platform team is focusing on everything non-domain specific, domain agnostic concerns, providing a blueprint or scaffolding for generating data products, providing observability of your data products, and so on. And on your governance part, you've got your teams that are really acting as facilitators and enablers. And of course, there's an overlap between each of these teams in terms of collaborative mode of interactions, right? They are collaboratively working with the platform team to embed policies as code, to translate those legal requirements into actual code that can be embedded and executed at every point of access to a data product. And also they're facilitating have a facilitating relationship with the domain teams to get them engaged in establishing those policies. But I guess I leave you with one thing, which is whatever mode you are in creating the change, adopt this movement-based approach to change, which is, we've got a list of business initiatives and we've got a criteria that will, of course, change, that filter that we change depending on what phase of evolution we're in. And we pick the right business initiative to really take end-to-end and implement end-to-end. And as part of implementation of that end-to-end use case, we are impacting change to those 5 facets of our organization. And we go through iterations of that, many iterations of that. And to really, for this to be feasible or even relevant, I will suppose I leave you with this quote from Immanuel Kant that for peace to reign Earth, we've got to look at the whole first, not individual. And really, data mesh it requires system thinking at a global level and optimizing for the dynamic equilibrium between individual domains and their autonomy and the global harmony of the mesh. Thank you so much.